unannounced. But we are live now. Welcome back to Leaders Live. Charlie Stevens, your host, here with Laura Chau.
Hello.
Yes, principal at Canaan Partners.
That's right.
Yes, we have a lot of great stuff to talk about today, but as people are live, we definitely want them to check in, make a comment, tag somebody who will learn something from this amazing venture capitalist and that should be watching it. And as we go through this, if there's any great tips or gems that you get through this, definitely make a comment so we can extract that and make some micro content that's easily shareable. But we are live here at Microsoft at the Entre Investor Series. So obviously, if you're watching and you're not here, you're missing out. You got to come here. The next event, we got an Investor Series first week of every month. So definitely check it out, joinentre.com. With that being said, enough of me talking. We obviously have a great speaker tonight. You are on a 30 under 30 Forbes list alumni, Stanford grad. I didn't get into Stanford, but we'll work on that. And also, obviously, principal at Canaan Partners. So let's bring it back a little bit. Let's talk about, where you were before. You were at Deloitte. You were at, I'm going to mess up this name, Marie
Kondo.
Yeah, Marie, yes. Give us a little context before Canaan Partners, what you were doing, and your journey up to this point.
Yeah, I'll actually start a little bit further back when I was at Stanford for undergrad. I grew up in Florida and I had no idea what entrepreneurship was or what technology was. I got to Stanford and it really opened my eyes as to what was happening in Silicon Valley. And because of that, I really started to get excited about startups. So when I was in college, I worked in a number of startups, one of which was a company called Water Cooler at the time. It was a 15-person company above a dim sum restaurant in Mountain View on Castro Street. And that eventually turned into a company called Kabam, which is a major gaming company that sold to Netmarble for close to $1 billion a few years ago. So that was really my first entree into startups, and it really got me excited about what could be done and what you could build with just a few people that could affect millions of people down the line, billions even. So through college, I was really excited about startups. In the end, I ended up going into strategy consulting, mainly because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, also maybe out of fear and kind of the risk associated with starting something or joining something so early, which is why I have so much respect for all the entrepreneurs in the room who put in all of the blood, sweat, and tears to build something from day one. But after Deloitte, so I was at Deloitte for a few years, mainly doing strategy and operations, working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies on M&A and growth strategy. But after that, I ended up transitioning into venture capital. My path there was a little bit circuitous. I didn't mean to end up there, but a friend of mine, when I was in undergrad, was at another venture capital firm and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about venture?" And I said, "No, I really had only thought about going to a startup, which is my next plan." But as I started to talk to him, I realized that venture was a really interesting career path for me, at least, and it was something that interested me because you get to learn every day, and you get to learn from entrepreneurs like you in the room who are inventing new things or who are experts in their fields, and it's such a privilege to be able to do that. And it's also an opportunity to learn about so many different things. Whereas an entrepreneur, you're 100% or 1,000% focused on the one thing you're doing and doing it so well. Whereas in venture capital, we're making a handful of bets. Oftentimes they're in very different sectors. And so you get to learn and see these different companies grow. And I think there is a part of it where you miss being on the operating side and being able to have that direct experience, but you also get the benefit of working with so many incredible people. So I joined Canaan back in 2014. I was on the West Coast for a number of years. And then in between there, spent some time in business school, again at Stanford, and had a few short operating stints, which again gave me so much respect for the entrepreneurs that we fund. So I spent some time at Greenhouse Software here in New York, which is an applicant tracking system, Branch Metrics, which is mobile deep linking out in Palo Alto. And then the earliest stage experience I had was working with Marie Kondo. So I worked with her back in 2017 in Tokyo. This was before the Netflix show came out. And we were talking about partnership earlier. And this, I think, is such a great example of a partnership where I honestly was just inspired by the book and kind of found a way to reach out through a friend of a friend, like a very lukewarm intro.
Give a little context. So I didn't know the book when you told me about it.
Sorry,
originally.
let me back up. For some of you may know, there's a woman, her name's Marie Kondo. She is sort of this Japanese tidying guru. She created this whole movement around tidying, and she has a very specific method that has sort of taken the world by storm in certain circles. And she wrote a book called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And when I read it back in this, I want to find a way to work with her. I think she's really inspiring. So went on LinkedIn and tried to find introductions to people. At the time, she had a team of about 4 people, almost all of whom were in Asia. And there was one person in San Francisco. And I hounded this person and said, hey, we got tea. We got tea in San Francisco, and he said, I'll do whatever. I'll come tidy, I'll carry your bag, whatever you need. And it ended up working out really well because they were starting to think about how to build their business and their brand. And I was coming from a position where in venture capital and in consulting, I had a lot of experience on growth strategy and thinking about brand and thinking about building a business. So I got to work with her really closely, and I think it's a great lesson in partnership where it's really about the resources and the skills you have and finding where you might have value that someone else is looking for, and trying to find the right pockets to help fit that in.
Right. We'll talk about what you learned from her, some of the key takeaways.
Yeah.
There's a lot you learned from her. You've given me a little bit.
I learned how to fold my socks, which I didn't do before.
I don't know how to do that.
But I think there's a number of things I learned, right? For her business is quite different than many of the businesses we look at on the venture side, although there are a number that have kind of a face or an icon associated. But it's a bit of a different model because she already had a following, and she had this built-in fan base. And a lot of businesses that we invest in now are just trying to build that. So she had this big advantage, and it really showed me the power of a network or a power of this built-in audience, which is really an unfair advantage, especially when you're building a brand. And so now when I look at other businesses, I try to look at what is that unfair advantage you have in building notoriety, right? For a lot of direct-to-consumer brands, right? It's really expensive to try to go the paid acquisition route on Instagram or Facebook and buy your users or buy your followers. Is there something that you can do, whether it's putting out content in a smaller way than maybe Marie Kondo, but is it something like doing events or bringing people together, partnering with other people who have a name that is bigger than yours to help build that following in an organic way?
Yeah.
Is a great lesson I learned just because she already had that and she understood how to continue to leverage it.
Right. She leveraged the reach that she had to build a brand, continue building a brand. What about going back to Deloitte, working with those Fortune 500 companies?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give you the mic here because I think they can't hear in the back. But working with these Fortune 500 companies and understanding how they operate, how they grow. What were some of the tips that you learned from that, or how to best operate a business that you take with you today?
You're taking me back. So I think one of the things at Deloitte is that you're working with.
I think I turned this off.
Oh.
Okay.
We good?
Yep.
Okay. And many of you in the room might know this. You're working with really big companies, many of whom are fairly slow moving or can be slow moving. And so I think one of the biggest lessons is how do you go in and figure out the right stakeholders and the right people who either have the power or have the ability to make a change? Because I think everybody wants to do that, but there's often sort of bureaucracy that you get caught up in that's very different than a startup. And a lot of it, aside from just the strategy of how to execute and the right, quote unquote, right answer, it's how do you find the right people to actually make the change? And I think that was the biggest lesson I learned from the consulting side. We would often work with a specific stakeholder, and maybe they were empowered to make a decision and they were hiring us to help figure out the right ammo or the right data to prove that decision. Sometimes it was people who, maybe weren't quite at the position to make the decision, but they really believed in it, and they were hiring us to help figure out what that answer should be and then take that to the next person. And I think it's a lesson that many startups can use when you're pitching to a customer, or you're talking to a potential partner, find the right person, and that will undercut so much of the red tape and the heartache and time spent in going through a POC and then trying to get to the next person and selling after that.
Right. I don't need the mic. I'll just scream. Let's talk about Canaan Partners right now. I mean, you're investing in entrepreneurs who are changing the world, essentially, tech, fintech. Give us a little bit of background, a little commercial, what you're doing at Canaan Partners, so that everyone has some more context of what it is.
Yeah, so Canaan is a large early stage venture fund. We've been around for about 32 years, have close to $5 billion in assets under management, and then our current fund is an $800 million vehicle where we invest in seed through Series B companies. So we typically are lead investors. About 80% of what we do is leading seed and Series A deals, and 20% is leading Series B. What that means is that we typically are looking for a meaningful stake in the company, and we'll usually take a board seat and work with those companies over the long term. Our whole game is that we want to be invested with those founders and in it until they exit or IPO or get bought. And so for us, it's really important to make sure we're looking for founders who are, again, thinking about really big businesses and really big companies. We invest across the board, so 1/3 of our fund is dedicated to healthcare with a dedicated team, so primarily biotech or biopharma. 2/3 of the fund is tech, and within tech, we split it about 50-50 enterprise and then consumer tech. I lead consumer deals at Canaan. Consumer is really anything that's B2C or B2B2C. Could be things, marketplaces like The RealReal, which we're an investor in, or on-demand services like Instacart. It could be consumer healthcare. It could be brands. We really kind of run the gamut, but the unifying thread is that they're all businesses that we believe can be really big and have founders that are really passionate and visionary about what they're doing.
Let's talk about the founders. We got a lot of founders here tonight. What do you look for in a founder? You know, a special secret weapon that they have, or like characteristic. It may not be one thing, but like, what do you see that usually stands out that catches your attention?
The thing that I have always gravitated towards and across my portfolio is a founder who is incessant about solving the problem that they are trying to solve, right? They can't go to sleep. They are thinking about it all the time. They're texting me, hey, I figured this thing out. It's something that they believe in and just have to figure out. They're also great storytellers. So much of your job as a founder is not only telling the story to raise money, but telling the story to convince people to join you, right? You need people to join your team, and oftentimes, you're not going to be able to pay them a huge salary. You're selling them on the vision and selling them on equity, because together you're going to build this great business. The best storytellers I have found are some of the best at that earliest stage of company building.
Yeah. I just think of the guy, Adam Newman at WeWork. He was a great storyteller.
He was a great storyteller.
It worked out well for a while. We were talking about you talked about the seed to Series A, B, and those are obviously different growth stages. And with that comes hiring and all the levels that you ramp up your team. Can you just break down the seed level to A to B, and then what you see in that growth trajectory? Yes.
Yeah. In terms of hiring or growth? Anything?
Well, let's even breaking down from the money that you're giving from seed A, B, C, and then in hiring and growth. Yeah.
So the names of the stages of investment, I think, matter a little bit less because it's constantly changing. Right now we have pre-seed and seed, and the ranges change a lot. But I'll say for seed, that means we're typically investing between $1.5 and $4 million. And for a seed deal, what we're looking for is a company and a founder that have an interesting product or vision around something. It doesn't have to have revenue necessarily. It doesn't have to have a launched product. But we are looking for a founder that has a very clear idea of what they want to do and a really big market in which they're doing it. We want the big market because, again, we need this massive outcome. And we expect the business will probably pivot, or it will change a little bit, and having a large enough market to do that within gives us enough kind of cushion or comfort that you'll be able to figure something out in there. And a lot of the bet, again, is on the founder and the market. And I think about founder market fit at the seed stage. And so why is this the right founder to be doing this business in this market? Maybe that founder has some unique insight. Maybe they're solving a problem that they encountered in their last job. I think that dynamic is really important. People talk about product market fit all the time, but at the seed stage, I actually think founder market fit is what I care about more, because oftentimes the product doesn't exist yet, or it's coming and it might change in that time. So that's seed and how I think about it.
Sure.
For the Series A, that's when you start to look for that product market fit. You're looking for an initial inflection in the business. Most of the companies that we invest in have some revenue traction or other form of traction. Maybe they're not monetizing yet, but they have a lot of users that they know they can monetize down the line. So I'm looking for some form of traction, and there's never hard numbers that I can give around this is the revenue you have to have, or this is the number of users you need to have. It's often just momentum, right? Are you growing at X% month over month or year over year? And have you figured out the one or two things that once you put more money into those are really going to change the business, whether it's on
throw gas on the fire.
Right, exactly, right? Is it on the marketing side where you can do that because you know for every $1 of marketing you're going to bring in $3 of revenue? Or is it on the product side because you figured out this is a thing that if you can scale this piece of the business from an engineering standpoint and support 100,000 users or 1 million users, you'll really be able to change the trajectory of the company. So I'm looking for momentum, and I'm looking for early signals of product market fit.
Okay. Now we're talking about funding. We understand what the batch is. What you already got pitched once tonight. I applaud you. I like that. What do you like to see when someone how's the strategy that you like? Is it an email, cold email, here tonight? But what's the right cadence, the follow up? What's the best way to approach you with a startup or a company that needs some funding?
Yeah, I'd say a warm intro is usually the best, and actually an intro from an entrepreneur in our portfolio is usually hands down the best. I think when I think about who I prioritize and how fast I get to emails, it's to my entrepreneurs first, and then it's to the partners in my firm, and then it's to other VCs or other entrepreneurs. And so again, for a fund where your whole job is about supporting entrepreneurs, and especially the entrepreneurs you funded, if you can get to a VC through one of their founders, I think that's probably the best intro. But other than that, any sort of warm intro is helpful. Cold emails, unfortunately, don't work as often as they can, and partly it's just because there's so much volume coming in, and so when you're prioritizing, you just have to. Meeting in person in events, I think it's a great opportunity to build some rapport and a relationship. And even if you can get your pitch in 20 seconds and share a little bit of it, it's a peek into how you're thinking about it. And that elevator pitch actually is really important.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. How about the elevator pitch? I mean, you bring up the elevator pitch. What is there a tip or strategy? I mean, you take in these companies, you invest in them. You obviously try to help them grow. What are some of the growth tips and communication tips that you give them?
Yeah. So the elevator pitch and the in-person pitch, I think the same things apply. What I'm looking for quickly, and actually was looking at DocSend data, where the average pitch sent to VCs is looked at for about 3 minutes and 44 seconds. So you have about that much time to catch someone's attention. And that includes the ones where people are spending an hour looking over it because they're thinking about investing. The things that VCs look at the most, according to DocSend, and I can probably vouch for that as well based on my own experience, they're looking at financials if you have them, but at the earliest stages, I think that matters a little bit less. They spend the second most amount of time on the team. And I think this in an elevator pitch is so important. Why are you the right person to be building this company, and why are you credible, right? So have you founded things in the past? Do you understand this problem? Have you already done XYZ with your business? The second is market, right? Oftentimes investors might not know about the market that you're building in, or it's a new market that doesn't exist. So quickly, if you can educate them on why this is a cool opportunity and a big opportunity in 10, 15 seconds, that's important. And then the product, right? What is it that you're actually building, and why is it novel and new, and why now? Oftentimes these businesses, people have thought about them before, right? Or they've tried something before, but is there something that's fundamentally different about the market today or about the ecosystem today that's going to position your company and you to build something big now?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to focus on the team. You put that as two. And I think there's a lot of founders here looking for co-founders or trying to build their team in this room or watching. The team aspect kind of falls into hiring as well and kind of company culture. What kind of tips would you give someone in your portfolio when building out that team?
Those first hires are so important. Every next hire adds to the culture or detracts from the culture, and so I think it's really important to make sure that you're hiring very, very thoughtfully, but then also willing to fire quickly, right? We've seen a lot of our portfolio companies who make a mistake on the hire, and it ends up being so much more costly to keep that person around because it is detrimental to the culture, it's detrimental to kind of the operations, and then it takes even longer to get the right person in the seat. So starting with the negative part, but on the hiring and getting the right people, depends on what stage of the company you're in, but for those early hires, I would really try to date them, right? Some of my companies, they'll hire them for a contract period as a way to kind of test the relationship and see how they work, and then extend it into a full-time offer with equity and a real stake in the business. Sometimes it's, spending time on them with a separate project outside so that you get to know them a little bit better. Founder dating, I think, is a totally different thing as well. That's your life, right? You're creating your own baby together with your business, and you better make sure that they're the right person to do this with, right? Like, do you have complementary skill sets? How do you think about decision making? How do you have disagreements and get through those? It's like a marriage, right? And I think it's really important and sometimes underplayed or undervalued by founders how thoughtful you need to be, because these are going to be some of the potentially most difficult times that you go through. You're going to be up late nights working on things. Things are going to go wrong, guaranteed, and you need to make sure that you are working with someone that you can get through that with.
Right. We're going to take questions in just a little bit, so just get your questions ready and we'll pass around the mic, which Jimmy will have. But before we get there, the partnerships and collaboration aspect is what we ask in the show a lot. What are maybe a partnership that's worked? I mean, you obviously mentioned one, but do you have another example of why it's worked, either with your business, another business that you've introduced? But like, how do you look at partnerships in growing the business, and what's successful?
I'll give an example from one of my portfolio companies. I invested in a company called Coterie, which makes elevated party supplies and party goods. So they're kind of taking on Party City, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but realizing that there's a need for beautiful product for kind of the millennial and Gen Z generation who wants to buy online and not go spend an hour in Party City. But they realized, as a small startup, it was hard to get in front of the right people and do so effectively or profitably. So they partnered with Reese Witherspoon's company, Draper James, which is a lifestyle brand more focused on kind of the Southern contemporary woman. And they did a co-branded line with Draper James. And so they have a whole set of party wear and tableware, co-branded Coterie by Draper James. And it sold out. And I think that was a great example of a collaboration where they were leveraging someone with a slightly bigger name than they do,
right.
Reese Witherspoon. And they were also bringing something to the table that Draper James wanted. They had no expertise in how to actually manufacture this type of paper good. They didn't have the time or the resources to do it, but Coterie could bring that to the table. I did a similar thing with one of our portfolio companies called Kuyana, which is a women's apparel and accessories brand. And I introduced them to Marie Kondo, and we did a collaboration. It was a Kuyana by Marie Kondo jewelry case, kind of inspired after bento boxes, so you can store all of your jewelry while you travel. And that sold out in like minutes. And so it's how do you bring together different parties who have hopefully overlapping demographics, because I think that really helps, right? You need to make sure you're actually going after the same customer, but then bring the right resources that each of the other party wants. And once you can do that, a partnership ends up being a lot easier because everybody wants it. It's good for everyone.
Right.
And then on the back end, you structure what it actually looks like economically.
Right. But trying to identify that and then partner together. I like that. We're at a networking event, obviously. Tips for networking that work best for you that you could share with everybody to help, later today after we get done with this.
My trick, I wear heels so that I'm tall, and I'm like the tallest Asian person anyone has ever seen, so you remember me. But I
don't think that's going to work for me.
But I think related to that, right? Like you want a reason for people to remember you, and maybe that's something about your business or something that you're looking for. Make sure you have something to say, right? Maybe it's your 30-second pitch. Maybe it's, this is something I'm working on. I'm looking for an answer. Can you help me? Right? And people love to help. And if you have a very clear ask, it makes it a lot easier for them to engage with you. Because if I just introduce myself and I don't say that much about it, no one has a reason to ask more because you're not giving them something to ask about. But if you have an ask, and everyone here always has something, I'm sure, that can really help on the networking side and just kind of starting that conversation. The other thing I think about is, we only have so many hours in the day, and you can only think about so many people in a day. How do you make sure you continue to expand and broaden your network? So I try to find people who are those connectors, right? I try to be a connector to the people around me, but then who else in my network will also have a bunch of connections where, because I know you and you know these other 150 people, you'll be able to make that introduction for me, and kind of keeping them as those nodes as your network really helps to broaden it overall.
Right.
And then also just how do you reach many people at once? Some use Twitter, LinkedIn, newsletters, events. I think there's a bunch of different ways where you can make your 1 hour meet thousands or millions of people versus a one-on-one interaction. And I say that where I have a strong bias towards the one-on-one interaction, and that's how I like to operate. But in today's world and from a networking perspective, I think having those nodes and those opportunities to leverage your time into a much larger network is important.
Yeah, and a tip I like too to leverage your time, especially when we're done here, is when you look at the other person, listen to what they're doing, and you both understand what you're doing. And if it doesn't work, a good ask is, who do you think in this room is the best person for me to meet? And then they might point you this way or that way. It helps you continue moving around and meet new people. And then you're also listening to what they do and trying to collaborate with each other. I think that's a good tip. I like that one. We're going to do some questions. I don't know where Jimmy went, but I think he's here. And do we have a mic, Sandy, that we can pass around? Or, just scream at the top of your lungs? I saw your hand go up first, and we'll get to you afterwards.
So this is for you, Laura. So what is the most interesting, either pre-launch or early-stage user acquisition strategy you've seen from one of your portfolio companies?
The question was, for a pre-launch company, what's one of the most interesting or unique user acquisition strategies?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I have a company, I can't share their name, but they don't pay for their users whatsoever. They build products, whether digital products or physical products, that are naturally viral. So they get other people to talk about them. And they build it into the product, and I think that's something that a lot of startups miss. How do you make your product something that people will want to talk about naturally, right? Is it instantly shareable? Is there something about it that is memeable, right? There needs to be something that's pressworthy about it, and not just because you're paying a PR agency to go say, hey, post this in whatever news outlet. It's because the product itself is newsworthy. And so figuring out what that is, I think, is up to the company and the founder, right? But building that into the product from day one can be a real advantage.
Jimmy's got the mic, and I think it's, what are you pointing to right now? Okay. We'll come back, we'll loop back around this way.
Hi, my name is Tremaine Grant. I'm the co-founder of an app called Bulk. It's a fitness app for weight gain. I promise it's a real market. So my question is, you talked about how important early hires are. We're actually in the process of bringing in a COO, and I was wondering, with the companies that you've worked with, what are some good qualities of a COO that you've seen?
I think it really depends on how you are defining the role in your company. And also, at the earliest stages, I think identifying what skills you have on the exec team and what you're looking to fill out, right? I think it's less about, what are the right qualifications for a COO generally, but I would map out, here's what I'm really good at, here's what I want to own within the organization, here's where I could really use someone else to help. Ideally, someone who's led organizations and led teams, who has a strong track record of working well at the exec level, and maybe this is their chance to kind of level up into a senior role. So maybe they haven't been a C-level executive before, but I would do a ton of reference checks to make sure that they have the experience leading teams and being able to make decisions well, and being kind of that right-hand person to you.
Good answer. Good answer. We got a mic over here.
So maybe I'll pull it back a little bit. Going into your background a little bit, I'm an accountant, and sort of when I was coming up through school, the jobs or the things that I thought or might be available aren't necessarily what are available now. Mm-hmm. My 15-year-old nephew is interested in finance. He's in a program now for finance. What tips would you give to someone who is looking to get maybe into the VC space on that side?
So there's no one path into venture capital. If I look at my firm, there's folks who came from banking, from consulting, from startups, straight out of school. And so unfortunately, I don't have a great answer as to what that looks like, but I do think what most VCs are looking for are people who have kind of at least a base level and a strong level of understanding on the finance side, right? So that you understand and can evaluate businesses from that perspective. But people who also have a strong point of view within different sectors. So we look for people who are obsessed about new businesses or new categories and kind of dive in head first, even if they haven't built a company there. They're really excited about learning and building their own thesis. And then I think also we look for people who are good people. Right? So do they have a strong network that's helpful to us when it comes to sourcing or for diligence, or just surrounding our portfolio with the right people? You don't have to be extroverted for this job whatsoever. I think there are really fantastic VCs who are just very thoughtful, really smart, kind of find their niche and do it that way. There's very different ways to do it, and there's no one profile.
Right here. I'm Rafael, investor from Brazil, and I have a question. Do you guys invest outside the US?
So we have. It's not a focus for us, but opportunistically, we absolutely would look at deals in LATAM or Europe. We used to have an office in India and then an office in Israel. We invest less there now just because, for us, because we're leading deals and we're sitting on the boards of those companies, we like to be a little bit closer at the earliest stages. Our companies are in kind of company building mode, and we want to be able to be there as a resource and be close. So most of our companies, as a result, are in the US.
A lot of West
invite
Coast.
you to know Brazil better.
I would love that.
Well, let's go here, and then we'll loop back around with the microphone.
Yeah, hi. So just a quick question in terms of like an employee who's trying to decide between joining an early stage versus a mid-stage startup. What would be some of the pros and cons for each, assuming that the end goal for the employee is to find a company eventually?
For that employee, I think some of the pros on the earliest stage side would be getting to see a company from day one or day two, right? You're going to wear a lot of hats. You're going to have a lot more access to the founding team or the CEOs who could potentially coach you. You'll be better incentivized from an equity perspective, perhaps. And maybe it's getting a little bit more access to the VCs, right? Or maybe it's access to some of the other partners that you have. So much of the sausage making happens at that earliest stage, which I think is invaluable for a founder. For a mid-stage startup, you're getting a company that has a little bit more structure. And so maybe they're looking for more of a functional expertise role, and that can be beneficial too. But for someone who's looking to found something, my bias would be to go to the earlier stage one.
Patty?
Hi, nice to meet you, thank you. As a single founder, and it might sound silly, but I'm serious, as a single founder, what would be the best advice for a company like yours to have a date and with a possible engagement and marriage?
I assume you mean in terms of spending time to figure out if we're the right investor for you?
Well, yes, so I'm a sole founder and I'm on this mission alone, but I'm at that point where, you know, I need a team.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, you know, it's a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And obviously you have to test out the waters.
Right.
And it seems to be that most of these events, the companies say that's a red flag, a sole member. So what would you advise the approach?
Yeah. So one of my portfolio companies has a sole founder. And I'd say for that, it wasn't a red flag to me because he had such a strong hold on the company and how he wanted to build it. Right? I didn't doubt that he would be able to build the team around him and kind of manage that emotional process on his own. And so honestly, I think part of it is showing that credibility to VCs, right? Why have you done this before? Do you have the right resources to do it? Do you have the right exec team around you to do it, where maybe you are the sole founder, but you have a very clear methodology for decision making, or you have a really strong governance around your team? Some of that, I agree. I think the general consensus in the Valley and in New York across tech is that having a sole founder can be difficult, or it's not necessarily a red flag, but something you might be concerned about. It just means you have to be extra proactive around showing your credibility and why you're okay to do that.
Thank you.
Pass this around here. I'll come back.
Follow up on your question, I think being a sole founder is one of the greatest things. Thomas Edison, George Westinghouse, back in the day, they all began as sole founders. And nowadays, these investors are like, where's your team, where's your team? But you know what, does Google go to the bar and just pick anyone? It's so important to find those right people.
Thank you.
And I really do, you need a lot of funding to get those right people.
Thank you.
So as I tried to grow my business, I was trying to recruit a team. Everyone's like, how much salary can you pay me? How much salary? I was like, I can't pay, I'm a founder, I just got out of college. Oh, and I can't work, I can't go to a meeting. And then, you know, it makes it hard then to raise funds. And it's not that, you know, Walt Disney said if you build it, they come, but if you find the right investors and the funding, so much can happen. I do have a question. Okay, I won awards as an inventor, I got on TV, it was great. But I got involved in a lawsuit with a company that scammed like thousands of people, scammed inventors, and when I'm sending my pitch decks, you know, I'm wondering, are they not getting back to me? Are they reading this lawsuit? I was misquoted in the news. Does one or two little negative things about someone totally make them blacklist you forever? And I don't know, just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
I think it depends on how the intro comes in. If it's a cold email from you, right, and that's kind of their only credibility point that they can find, they Google your name, it might be, right? But I think that means, again, it's the onus is on you to make sure you get the right introduction and you have a chance to tell your story, or you meet the right people and demonstrate that credibility up front. And maybe in your email, it's getting ahead of it.
Yeah, I have awards, but I also have this big lawsuit.
Yeah, and
I got really hurt, and I'm just wondering, is that frowned upon? Like Google and Apple, they're suing people all the time.
True.
Samsung, you know what I mean? But
I think it really depends on the nature of it, and it might not be an issue at all, right?
We're gonna do 3 more, 1, 2, 3, and then wrap it up, and then we can all network afterwards. Just give some time. So.
Sure, thank you. I think being a woman in BC and also ethnic minority, I find it quite remarkable, not an easy journey. I was reading about like Ellen Paul, like Clarenberg's book on Reset. I guess my question would be like, what are some of the lessons learned, or like what are some of the best practice like for other raising and problems in BC there?
and that was, what are some of the lessons learned for being a VC? Female VC, yeah. So I wrote an article a couple years ago called "What's Rarer in Silicon Valley Than a Unicorn?" A female VC, which actually was true at the time, given the number of women who were in venture firms and the number of unicorns that we have, because there's like hundreds at this point. But I think with venture capital, and whether it's being a woman or being from an underrepresented group, with venture, it's just such a small community, and so part of it's just how do you get in the door, right? And I think that's something the industry is working on and that we can do much better at. And there are groups like All Raise that have really changed that environment. But it starts with making sure that we get people in the seats and giving them experience, both in terms of like, this is a career path that's even possible, and then also making sure they get mentored throughout. I think mentorship is the thing that I've learned the most about, that I think is critical, right? Having mentors who are not just women, but men, and having mentors who are senior, who can open doors for you and kind of vouch for you, but then also having mentors who are a couple steps ahead of you in their career, who remember how to take that next step strategically or tactically. Because oftentimes when you're with someone who's 20 years senior to you and they're telling you about their path, it might not be relevant anymore. But if you have someone who is a couple years ahead of you and they say, this is how I navigated that, that can be really powerful. And I tell that to all of my founders too. Find the mentors at startups who are like one stage of funding ahead of you or two stages, because they'll have much better advice on how to navigate the fundraising ecosystem today, or how to solve this problem, or what service provider to go to, versus someone who founded a company 15 years ago and exited, and yes, they're very successful and can open doors, but maybe they're not the best on some of the strategic things you need.
We got two more questions and we'll wrap it up.
Yes, I'm Maurizio from Portugal. I'm managing partner of Angel Group. The question, how do you define the evaluation of the startups?
Both art and science. When it comes to evaluating a company and kind of getting to evaluation, a lot of it's driven by the market, right? So what are other VCs willing to pay? And I think that's part of it, because we're competing, and for us at the earliest stages, I'm interested in owning a piece of this business, and I think it's worth X amount. But maybe if another venture fund is going to bid X plus 2, I might bid X plus 2 as well. And maybe I think it's truly only valued at X today, but if I think it's going to be X plus 1,000 in a few years, or X times 1,000 in a few years, I'm willing to pay that extra too. So it's kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but I think the valuation is a little bit of a dance of, okay, when we're looking at the revenues and the growth rate and the margins of this business, we think you back into a number that is X amount for the valuation, but then also playing the game of the market and how do we actually win the deal to participate will affect the final valuation as well.
With the last question.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tracy Wong, and we have a B2B VR merchandising showrooms profession. And I have a question about, like you mentioned about you guys are looking for seed to Series B, and you also gave an amount for like the seed and versus like Series A and so on and so forth, and also some sort of traction. Like that determines which category it falls under. But my question is like what if our company actually has some sort of traction lined up, but at the same time the amount that we're looking for really just falls into the pre-seed bracket?
That's great.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you and great for investors. If you already have traction or a clear path,
it's like set up. It's lined up.
Yeah, and if you have contracts that you can point to, or there's kind of a clear path to traction, and you don't need that much capital, it's great for you, because then you'll potentially get a better deal in terms of a higher valuation, less dilution. Mm-hmm. And with a lot of startups, I think they get caught up in this game of raise as much as you can, get the highest valuation you can, but also think about the cost there, because that means potentially you're giving away more of your company to a VC. And what's your end goal? Is it to make a lot of money for you and your employees? Mm-hmm. Is it to sell this company and have it be a household name? they don't necessarily go hand in hand in terms of raising a lot of capital and having a crazy valuation at the start.
Okay, I'll come talk to you after.
That's great. As we wrap it up, words to live by, personal mantra, ethos, leave us off with something good.
The thing I always talk to my founders about is building community, and I think it's very apropos given where we are. Community has been so important to me, both in my career, personal life, and everything, and I think having the right people around you, having a broad network, but also kind of that core network of people who can be your advisors, who can be your mentors, and who can be your compatriots as you figure out your next steps, it can really change the trajectory of both your life and your career.
Right. So build the community tonight, all right? I think that's it. That's it. And Nadal's going to wrap it up, and you guys clap it up. Let's get it.
Thank you.
Listen to music.